this episode of the podcast, I have with me Pete Hunt. He is the CEO of Dagster Labs. We're going to be talking about the open source nature of their product, Dagster, and a little bit about the benefits of the product, the data orchestration market, some of the challenges, some of the reasons why they decided to go open source. I mean, Pete's got a great background in open source. Have to ask him why. I'm sure he has some great reasons, and just super excited to cover this topic. Pete, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks. I'm excited.
All right. So before we dive in, I mentioned, obviously, you are with Dagster, and I just want to make sure everyone is aware of what the product is before we dive in and start kind of picking apart the benefits and all those things that we want to cover.
Sure. Yeah. So let's set the table a little bit. Modern businesses, big and small, they're generally, data is a big component of those businesses. So whether you're an executive who is taking a look at the latest sales data, or somebody in marketing taking a look at the latest SEO data, or you're building a product and you have a machine learning system in the back, like a Netflix style recommender. All of these businesses are either building their products with data or they are making critical business decisions with data. The data comes from somewhere, and the data comes generally from source systems. And it can be very messy, it can be hard to interpret. And you need data teams or data practitioners to help you make sense of that data and turn that data into actual actionable insights or other data products. And so the way that you do that is you make a thing called a data pipeline. And so what a data pipeline does is it takes data from some source system. So that could be from your inventory management system, your SEO and web analytics system, whatever it is, and then puts it into a pipeline where it kind of combines data together, splits it apart, transforms it. And then on the other end of the pipeline comes kind of nice, clean, and pristine data assets. So machine learning model, a table in a data warehouse, a file sitting in a file system, or a dashboard sitting in the BI tool of your choice. And so that's kind of setting the table. The people that build those data pipelines, we call them data engineers. Now, you can go on LinkedIn and find people with the title data engineer, but at Dagster Labs, we kind of think of data engineering as a practice, not really a job title. So there are certainly people with the title data engineer, but there are people with other titles too that do that job of building, maintaining, and consuming data pipelines. So they have titles like analytics engineer, data platform engineer, even like infrastructure engineer, data scientist, data analyst. All of those folks, maybe not 100% of them, but big chunks of those teams spend some portion of their time working on these things. And so we kind of consider them all data engineers, at least part-time. And so what Dagster does is it does what's called data orchestration. So we make sure that those pipelines run on time. We make sure that they, if there are failures in the data pipeline, that those are retried. And we track all sorts of interesting, metadata about them. So we really are basically a Python framework for building, maintaining, and operating data pipelines, and a bunch of tooling that sits on top.
Awesome. I love it. I guess just to kind of dive in, looking at the marketplace, there's obviously data orchestration tools. I guess you guys have open source. We'll touch on the open source, but why Dagster? What was the driver of going? We need an additional tool in the marketplace.
Yeah, so the project was started a couple of years ago. The founder of the project is Nick Schrock, the CTO here at Dagster Labs, and a good friend of mine. And he kind of took a look at, he was leaving Facebook. He was trying to figure out what to do next, and took a look at all the different options in front of him. He wanted to work on a very serious society impacting problem. And so, wanted to cure cancer with software engineering, something like that, and then started talking to all these really important institutions, like financial institutions, hospitals, pharma companies. And the same problem kept coming up, which is, we can't keep track of our data. Like, we just don't know where our data is coming from. We don't know where it's going. We don't know whether it's up to date. We don't know whether it's passing its quality checks. We don't have a map of it. Like, we don't know who is working on what. This very basic data hygiene was lacking from these organizations. And so he went to work kind of figuring out why that is. And the most popular tool for solving this category of problem was called Apache Airflow. And it's one of these tools that really created a category and was super innovative, when it was built. And we all owe a great deal of debt to this tool for creating a category, making a lot of people's lives much easier. But it's got that taste of a tool that was built 10, 15 years ago. So there are a lot of design decisions that were made back when it came out that they're now kind of stuck with. And so it generally is not one of these tools that is beloved by the people that use it. So, one big problem, there's a bunch of things that are wrong with the developer experience. There are a bunch of things that are wrong with its place in an organization with multiple data teams. And then there's also a bunch of just kind of missing capabilities that more modern tools have. And so, what Nick saw when taking a look at the space was people were hacking their way around these limitations and saw an opportunity to introduce a new programming model and a new data orchestrator on top of that programming model to fix those issues.
So I guess in terms of the data environment, everything is getting more complex. People are requiring more engineering skills. People require the same level of data quality, if not better, because of how sensitive the data has become. When you're looking at a product like Dagster and it's kind of addressing some of the monetization components of orchestration, I guess, where does that fit? Or how important are some of those pieces to how Dagster was built?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So there are fundamental architectural decisions that have to be made at the core of the system to solve these problems. And I think that's one of the reasons why Airflow has really struggled to keep up. So let me talk about a couple of them here. So the first is the programming model. So the way that orchestration has historically been adopted is, Airflow is called a workflow orchestrator, and there are other workflow orchestrators like that. There are a series of tasks. A task runs one after another. There are dependencies between the tasks, and tasks can be retried when they fail. But the orchestrator doesn't know what the task is actually doing. And in fact, if you were to go look at your dashboard or look at your data asset sitting in a S3 somewhere or in a data warehouse somewhere, and two numbers aren't adding up, or there's otherwise a problem with the data, going from that data asset to the task that produced it is basically impossible. And so oftentimes debugging challenges with data becomes really difficult in a task-based orchestrator. So what Dagster does is rather than orient around the task, we orient around the data asset. So there's literal line of code that corresponds to every asset that's being produced by the data pipeline. So you can very easily jump to that and debug, identify issues with it and fix them. And also it just is a better mental model for developers. They want to think in terms of data assets. They don't want to think in terms of pipeline steps. It's just too many concepts. The second is building multi-tenancy in from day one. So this is one of the biggest pain points with Airflow and actually a lot of Python-based systems is that, if you have multiple teams collaborating on a single code base, they have to be stuck on the same version of Python, same dependencies. If somebody pushes a bug that blows up memory consumption, they take down everybody else. Airflow is fundamentally a single tenant system. And so the way that people have dealt with this is they build these fairly complicated Docker pipelines and Kubernetes pipelines around it. And so Airflow orchestrates Kubernetes, which then orchestrates your actual compute. The challenge here is that building and pushing a new Docker image is a really slow process, and it's really difficult, if not impossible, to test that locally. And so there's all hacking around limitations of how Airflow was architected. And so we've architected with this notion of code location. So basically you can have every team can own one or more different code locations on their own version of Python, their own version of dependencies, runs in their own service. So they're fully isolated from each other, but they all do plug into the same control plane. So you can get that single pane of glass that visualizes the whole organization's data platform, while each team can kind of blow up their own stuff and not affect anyone else. So the first architectural difference is that core programming abstraction, and the second architectural difference is this kind of architecture of having separate code locations that plug into a single control plane.
I guess when it comes to complexity, I know you mentioned, the data engineering role, and I was thinking about traditional older data tools, right? I mean, we can go back and a lot of things were tool driven. People got really good at tools, 20 years ago, but there was very little actual coding, understanding of, need of infrastructure of things on a laptop. When you're looking at, I guess, the complexity of the current world, current data, and you're looking at some of those analogies of those older tools that were, everything was heavily tool based. You're talking about Airflow was single tenancy, and you're kind of looking forward. How much of the tool will start helping, right? Now, I don't want to worry about AI and all that stuff, but just how is the tool going to evolve to reduce that engineering component? Because it's hard to find people that have that low niche skill of being really good with data, really good with the software. That's difficult. Are the tools going to start helping that, or is it always going to be a case of you still need some of that engineering because it is heavily complex, it is heavily cloud and API dependent?
Well, I think that reasonable people can disagree on this, but I can tell you our perspective. And we feel very strongly that software engineering best practices are the way out here. That doesn't necessarily mean everyone has to be an expert programmer. And in fact, if you look at the front end, I had worked on the front end world or in a previous life, and front end adopted modules, CI/CD, static typing, functional programming best practices. And front end is like kind of notorious for having people from like very diverse backgrounds, like no CS degrees, kind of coming in and like learning on the job. And they've adopted software engineering best practices, I think, earlier than data practitioners who generally do come from like a kind of a more analytical or quantitative background, right? And so I do feel very strongly that adopting these best practices, testing, static typing, CI/CD, local development, observability is a big one, is critical to managing the complexity. I don't think that means that everyone's going to need to completely upskill and like learn all these concepts. I actually think that over time, the tools are going to get simpler. As we start to dial in and realize what the best practices are, API surface areas are going to go down and complexity is going to go down. And like we've seen this in our product, right? Like, every release, I don't think we actually measure this, but it feels like the API surface area goes down in every release because we're starting to make extra concepts redundant. I've got this every time we work in the feature, I always try to get rid of nouns because nouns kind of like indicate, oh man, I got to learn what this new concept is. Oh geez, right? Like so I do think that is happening all over the industry, not just us, but certainly happening at Dagster.
That's interesting. I mean, I guess everyone likes to talk about AI, and might as well just ask you your thoughts of does that come into play into these products? Is that, you talked about simplifying. Is that a potential future, or is it just the product becomes simpler and just easier to use because UIs are building out a more complete and richer tool set functions?
I think that Copilot is cool and helpful, and we have lots of engineers and users and customers using it. So there's like kind of these tools that help engineers do their job, especially in testing. I think it's a very useful tool. In terms of beyond that, I'm in a wait and see mindset. And the reason for that is, data is high stakes, right? Like you're operating your business, you're reporting metrics to Wall Street based on the outputs of these data pipelines. And large language models today are kind of notorious for hallucinating things and introducing unpredictability and non-determinism, which is like exactly the opposite of what you want in this domain. So while I think that they are great, human assistant, like they're great at like assisting humans in writing code. And there's a lot of interesting potential to actually run inside of data pipelines. I think for now, they're like not ready for it. So we're waiting and seeing. But like I didn't think that we would have Chat GPT, even a month before it came out, right? So this space can change very rapidly, and maybe by the time this airs, this is completely outdated.
That'd be pretty awesome. But yeah, no, it's interesting. I appreciate. I know it's still all early. People are still figuring it all out, and ChatGPT is cool. But how does it get used into more complex, processes? Wait and see is fair. I wanted to pivot, make sure we covered this because obviously it's part of your background. I did want to talk about why open source Dagster, but before you answer that, I kind of would like everyone to know a little bit about your background and orientation with open source, because there's probably a component of people listening to this podcast that'll be familiar with what you've open sourced. So maybe if you could just give us a little bit of that background, and then we'll transition into why open source Dagster.
Yeah. So I love open source. I actually a lot of people think I'm like a co-founder of Dagster, but actually I joined the company in 2022 and became CEO towards the end of 2022. And I got to know the founder and CTO and former CEO. He was a solo founder. It's a ton of work. You need help, so I came on to help. Nick Schrock. I got to know him at Facebook, and we were both working on open source back at Facebook. So I was working on React.js. I was one of the founding members of the team there. Nick was the co-creator of GraphQL. So we were kind of sitting down the hall from each other. We both developed a real passion for open source and like growing communities. And both of those were pretty successful open source dev tools. And so just love making developers happy, seeing the power that these things can have. They can transform entire industries. With React, now there's like people who have changed their careers and like, they bought their house because of React, which is like kind of a cool feeling. Every once in a while you get somebody writing and saying like, hey, this library changed my life. And you're like, oh, that's awesome. So that's really where I got to know Nick and how I eventually ended up at Dagster. But it's also kind of where I developed this like real passion for working on developer tools. I got a lot of like opinions about what makes a good developer tool, what doesn't, how to help people learn them, those sorts of things.
Awesome. And I guess, both of you were deeply involved with open source. And I guess maybe this is a question for him, but I'm sure you know the backstory, or you may have been involved in it. But the idea to open source the product, what was the driver? Because obviously you didn't have to, but you both love that open source mentality.
So fundamentally, data orchestration is infrastructure. And I think that most companies run by like competent technical people, like they want as much of their fundamental core infrastructure to be open source as possible. Now, we think that there's a lot of great alignment where like you can kind of give people the core infrastructure for free in open source. Everybody can work to improve it. And then there's value added features on top that are targeted at larger teams. They would not fall into the category of infrastructure. They would be kind of like features like, or audit trails and stuff like that sit on top of the infrastructure. And those are things that we kind of have in our commercial product. And so, a key principle for us is like, the infrastructure piece that is like core to keeping the system up and running, that should always be open source.
I like that. I think, I wish more products would be like that, but I do like the sense that there is a division, and that some companies just won't need to pay for the pieces they don't need, and what they need could be used out of the box. I guess when you're kind of looking at the vision of Dagster, and you've been CEO now for a little bit of time, ideally, where do you hope the product goes in the next couple of years?
I published a blog post about this called the Dagster Master Plan. But largely, one way to think about data orchestration is there's a data graph inside of your organization, right? There's all these different assets and they all depend on each other, and there's a graph. And so the first thing we're trying to do is expand the breadth of the graph. So pull in all the data into one system so you can actually reason about what's going on in your data platform. If you're trying to follow, hey, we collected a phone number from the user, where is it being used? Being able to answer questions like that is really important. The second is to increase the depth of data per node and per edge, right? So we are currently working on cost management products, for example, so we can keep track of how expensive each one of these assets are to materialize, how much you're spending week over week, help you optimize spend. Data quality is another additional piece of metadata that we're attaching to assets, and we're working on some new data quality features. And so there's stuff like that. I do think of it as value accrues to the company and to the product as that graph grows in both breadth and depth. And so that's kind of the main themes, I think, as we go. But really what we do, it's not rocket science. It's like we built a product, people like it, they use it. We ask them what they need, they tell us, and then we go do those things. So it's there is a little bit of grand strategy here, but it's much more like roll up your sleeves and just like do the work than anything else.
I love it. Well, I think the vision is always, it seems like it's there, and obviously you got to lay the bricks and foundations to get there. So it sounds exciting. Hopefully can have you on down the road and just see how the product's progressed and kind of adoption. Those will be some cool things to talk about. Before letting go, two things. One, if somebody wants to follow up about Dagster, maybe open source, either one, what's a good way of getting a hold of you?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm Pete Hunt. I'll come up. There's also Dagster.io/community. We've got links to everybody's socials there and how to get in touch with everybody. I'm also on the Dagster community Slack, so you can just send me a message and I'll answer it.
Awesome. I'll have to get some of those links, make sure we include those in the show notes. And last question, if you could have a guest talk about a topic that you'd be interested in listening to on a future episode, what would you like to hear more about?
I think that open source led business models are a hot topic right now. So everything from pricing to differentiating the cloud product from open source to licensing. So it's a hot topic in data right now, certainly with the recent DBT changes, and as well as kind of in the industry at large. So I think there's a lot of interesting meat on that bone. So that's what I would choose.
Awesome. That's a great one. We gotta find somebody to talk about that. Maybe have you come back. Who knows? We'll see what we can do. But I definitely appreciate your time. Thanks for sharing. It's been great.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, if you found the episode useful, if you enjoyed it, share with somebody else. That's how the podcast has been growing. And if you do know someone that is involved in open source pricing, strategy of product development, I think these will all be really interesting, especially in the data space. And maybe we can actually do a panel conversation with Pete included. Let me know. Otherwise, like, share, subscribe, comment, do your thing. Until next time. Thanks. Goodbye.